Welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today. Aspiration, in its simplest definition, is a lovely flame climbing heavenward. True aspiration can and does make us feel that if God is for us, who can eventually stand against us? We feel a desire to have God on our side, but we need the aspiration to throw ourselves on God's side. The sun is the only remedy for the dark clouds in the sky. Similarly, there is no other medicine than aspiration for our troubled hearts. Aspiration is the first rung of the sky-kissing ladder. Realization is the last. True human aspiration has three intimate friends: purification, quietude, and intensity. Aspiration has an enemy called impatience. Aspiration is the mounting flame of our divine wish to raise ourselves to the crest and crowning of divine perfection. The body aspires through action. The vital aspires through struggles. The mind aspires through self-search. The heart aspires through the feeling of union. The soul aspires to the perfection of God's manifestation. Jess Van Garsse, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome. That was Sri Chinmoy. Have you read his work, or do you know who that cat is?
I don't actually. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, well, he was a, I hate to use the word guru. He was. He lived in an ashram in Queens and was very influential with a lot of different cats. So that was his writing. I don't take credit for it, but I just wanted to start just by asking you about impatience. Impatience for me has always been, even from when I was a young boy. I mean, I always had so much to do and nowhere to go, I guess, if that makes any sense. I was always anticipating things and a lot of anxiety and worry, and it was because of impatience. And to a degree, it still haunts me today. It's part of my habitual nature, and I can see in you somebody who is, your heart has been broken open and you have surrendered. But I also see that there's been a lot of work on your habitual nature, and I wonder if impatience is part of that.
It's so funny you said that. I had to laugh out loud because there were so many beautiful words and interesting concepts and things we could talk about in that reading, and the word impatience popped out. So I thought, yeah, I could talk about that.
Yeah, I know.
I could talk about that. It's funny. One of the ways my impatience certainly came out was, I would say, spiritual impatience. I think once I discovered this path and started meditating, started sort of the spiritual journey. I was so impatient to get there already. Like, why am I not enlightened already? And my dear teachers were very patient with me, with sort of a knowing and I think like familiar smile, that they too have experienced that, continue to. I think once you get sort of a taste, you want all of it. Once you sort of see the reality of the world, you want to know all of it right away, or I do, know all of it right away, have access to all of that. And I think that's certainly softened over the years. I think in the beginning I was really impatient. And now I really, there are moments where I think, why am I not there already? Why am I experiencing being a human being and all of our quirks and foibles,
Sure.
in this moment? But I really, that patience has come, I think, as you alluded to, just through a lot of work. First, awareness of my impatience, and then, which is always the start for everything, and then a gentle, rather than I want to be different and I need to be different and being impatient is so bad, and I must cultivate patience, just sort of an awareness, a sort of laughing at myself with love, and a softness with a desire, to do the opposite. And I think the patience that I have today is pretty miraculous, considering how I used to be. My family at one point started calling me Jess 2.0 once I
Right. No, I mean,
had
it's,
been meditating for a while.
that's beautiful. I mean, is it fair to say that, I mean, sometimes, I mean, my motto is take what you do very seriously, but don't take yourself that seriously. And
Mm,
I just
mm,
wonder if there was a certain period of time where Jess Van Garsse was very much, your ego was very invested in your, in your work, in your love, in your
mm,
day to day.
mm,
And then like when you started to drop into the soul space, did you recognize that, um, that you were only really partially responsible for information? I mean, you are a conduit, and the idea of
mm.
the information coming through you required you to get out of your own way or get out of
Exactly.
your and I just, could you talk about a time when you realized, like, because you did allude to laughing at yourself and sort of not taking yourself that seriously and recognizing that in order to be an effective conduit for information coming through you from the heavens, that you had to get out of your own way.
Absolutely. Um, well, kind of going back to the first piece of the question, I mean, yes, there was a lot of my life, from really childhood, all the way up until probably 10 years ago, where I was wholly identified with what it is that I achieved,
Mm,
and
mm,
that's very much the ego. And I was trained that way where I grew up, by culture and society. I'm not unique in that way. And I was extremely high achieving. And then I would just sort of get accolades for that, right? And so everyone around me was telling me, you know, that I was doing it, and this was it. And
right.
I reached a point. I was a documentary filmmaker and a director of film and television and video, and
Wow.
you know, I I reached a point, where my work had been nominated for an Oscar and an Emmy and these, Webby Award, and I had all these fellowships, and I had this career that I loved. I got to travel the world and tell stories, and I remember hitting a point where I realized it wasn't so concrete at first. Like, it started as something much more unconscious, and then later it became conscious. Is this it? Like, I'm actually not that happy,
Mm-hmm. Wow.
or my happiness is actually very tied to things that I get or achieve, things of the ego.
Mm.
And there was this sort of simmering discontent underneath. And that was the beginning of, what I would call my seeking, really. I mean, up until that point, I was always reading a self-help book in therapy. It wasn't that I wasn't working on myself, but I was working on myself from a place of like, how do I get fixed and how do I get happy and what do I do, And then there was this shift into a seeking for um, what might be like some path or some avenue to get at what was really underneath all of it. And that was a process. As I said, I don't think I consciously knew that when I kind of came to meditation. But that became clear over time as I started to have more awareness and as I started to be happy for no reason, and content with my life. And as you said, identifying with something greater than all of that. My definition of myself was no longer, I do this for a living and I'm married to this person and I believe this and have these opinions and have these desires. And, I think that I often, before I teach, I always take a moment and I ask, um, please, please help me get out of the way, you know, please help me to get out of the way here, and there's usually a bit more to that conversation and that ask, but allow me to be that conduit, allow your words to flow through me, allow me to just be a vessel for what it is that you would have me do, so that I may be of service, to these people that I'm teaching. But it's always about, yeah, help me to get out of the way, like little m me. I think we have, um,
Right.
you can think of big S self, small S self, big M me, small m me. That's sort of like the ego part of us versus the the wholeness, the truth of what we are, the oneness. And so,
Let me,
yeah, I think that's something I can definitely ask for.
um, you're really articulating everything so beautifully. I mean, um, you know, what gives you street cred? Why do you have credibility as a teacher of meditation?
Sure. Well, first, I would say, I mean, I'm deeply trained, which I'll talk
No,
about in
no,
a
no.
second, but
I know
yeah,
everybody has to do the 200 hours, but there's a lot of charlatans and a lot of faux.
yeah,
But like when
exactly. And yet,
the minute I saw your eyes, I saw somebody who, I mean, the thing that you said though earlier on is that it's a forever journey. So the idea that
yeah,
this is going to somehow I mean, we get newfound truths and miracles and revelations every day, but kind of the impatience thing, like that's kind of a work in progress. But
hmm
I was hoping you could talk about, your superpower.
yeah. Thank you for that, because I agree. I think the meditation teaching is actually not even as regulated as yoga, where you have to do a 200-hour
Mm-hmm.
training. And so someone can just have meditated once and liked it and hang a shingle and say, yeah, I'm a meditation teacher, and that's fine. But I think, I always say,
Actually, I don't think that's fine, but I
let's,
mean, that
yeah,
happens. So yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
I mean, I'll let that go,
yeah,
right? We
sure,
don't need to debate that point here.
no,
Let's say you want to learn how to swim, right? So first of all, people think meditation is something that we are just supposed to be born knowing how to do well, right? And they'll sort of beat themselves up if they don't get it right or find it easeful. But we're not born knowing how to swim. And you want to learn how to swim, you can throw yourself in a pool and thrash around and try to not drown. You could read a book about swimming. You could watch a YouTube video. You could ask a friend who swims, how to swim, or you could get a professional swim lesson, And so I think there is a piece that, deep training certainly plays into that. But I think for me, beyond that, you asked sort of what makes me uniquely qualified in the way that I show up as a teacher. And I think part of it is, my, I had tried, I can't say all, but many meditation styles and techniques in my search, many, just about everything. And nothing quite clicked for me. And I just thought my brain is too busy. I can't get anywhere deep. I'm sitting here thinking about my to-do list or what I'm going to have for lunch, and it's not working for me. Either I'm doing it wrong or somehow I'm wrong, and it made it worse. Then I just had one more thing to feel bad about not doing, and I couldn't be consistent with it. And I think based on that, I found a technique that was very different and did kick off quite a transformation. And because I have that experience, I think I particularly can work really well with people who felt that way, which is it hasn't quite clicked, or they do meditate, but they know there's something more profound to be had. And because I was them,
sure,
I
sure, sure.
really I can speak to that. And then I think also the other piece is just having had my own journey with it. And then, as I said, I trained for many years. I live in India in an ashram, all of this. I have years of teaching experience. But I think the other piece, this is so fun to reflect on, is I think a lot of teachers feel as though they have to have it all together and either pretend to themselves that they do or pretend to others. And there's sort of a lot of spiritual bypass in a sense of, I'm supposed to be perfectly serene, sitting on my tuffet, having no human qualities and journey and struggles myself. And I think that there was a moment when I first kind of graduated from training where I think I felt that way, but that ended quickly. And I realized that, I see a teacher as being in this position of kind of having one hand stretched backwards to help the next person along, and one hand stretched forward.
Mm.
I'm on my journey. I all it is that I'm further along in this realm, and I can say, oh yeah, I remember being there. Like, here's how I got around those rocks, And I don't know, I'm wary of people who think they're done and who don't have who aren't still on their own journey and have their own teachers, and it's a lifelong
Yeah, you're
process.
never. I
And
mean,
yeah,
can you go deeper and talk about because I mean there are you know faux teachers, but at the same time there's a lot of just a lot of teachers of mindfulness and
yeah,
meditation,
yeah,
I always consider the definition of success is doing whatever you're doing and being and cutting above the morass and being singular and unique in compared to what everybody else is doing. As a broadcaster
mhm,
in my case, or a journalist, and when
mhm.
you say you took a non-traditional route to what was that way that when it finally clicked, and how is it different from maybe a more square meditative delivery?
Do you mean after I became a teacher
You
or
said
what I
you just
teach?
said that like you went through many different modalities, but it didn't click.
Yeah,
And then at a
yeah.
certain point, you actually made up your. It sounded like you said you almost made up your own.
No, I didn't
Okay.
actually. So I was taught a technique that comes from ancient India and involves these ancient mantras, repeating them silently to oneself. And there's a few variations of this, and this was just different. I found myself enjoying it, finding it easeful, doing it every day, and it was just very, very different. And listen, I think there are a lot of doorways to the same place. I think again, you should be wary of someone who says this is the way, this is the only way. Um,
Danger.
you'll never hear me say
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
However, this was so incredibly different from anything I had done. It was easeful. It was everything I had not experienced with meditation, and it changed my life. There were profound benefits within the first week. And those kept growing. And so that's what I teach, because that's what works for me and has worked for me. And I think again, it's about, there are a lot of meditation teachers out there. There's a ton of styles. Saying you've tried meditation is like saying, oh yeah, I've tried that whole exercise thing. There's so many ways to do it and so many different kinds of teachers. And I think rather than trying to, encompass everyone and reach everyone and be something you're not, I think the more authentic and the more honest and true to myself that I am, and not pretending to be anything else, people are drawn to that, right? The right people. I'm not everyone's, I'm
No,
not
and I would
everyone is drawn to me as a teacher, just like I wasn't.
Jess Van Garcia. I want to be very clear. This is like
Yeah.
I like how diplomatic you're being, but this is your
Uh-huh.
interview, so I want you to talk about.
Yeah.
I want you to talk about that practice and how
Oh,
people
sure.
and how it has so what is in your mind, what is your ability superpower as far as a healer? What is the feedback you get from
Hmm.
people based on the
Yeah.
modality that you are I don't you don't need to preface it by saying there are about all these other things, because there is just a sea out there, but this is
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
want to hear about you.
Yeah, great. Well, I can certainly talk about that. I think that what what people find over and over, I mean, it's really humbling, and it's really to be teaching meditation is both the greatest surprise and the greatest joy of my life. I feel delighted every time I get to do it. I can't actually believe people pay me to do it. It's my favorite thing to do.
Mm.
And over and over I get, it's so moving, and it reminds me that this is not me doing this. This is something so much bigger and so much more powerful, because at the end of every single course, I get feedback like, I think you changed my life, you know,
Mm.
um, and like, I feel like a different person after 4 days. And this is the best thing I've ever done for myself. And there's just this like glow. And it's not one of those, where it's like, this is amazing, I'm going to do this, and then 2 weeks later you're back to not doing it. It's sort of this like excited but like calm and knowingness, that people leave with, and they're often just like tears of gratitude, and it's really powerful. It's really, really amazing to get to do. And you know to me, it's not surprising. I'm never surprised. People start noticing the things the first day or two. I mean, I'm delighted for them and I'm encouraging, but I'm never surprised. I know how powerful this is, and it's just fun to see the way that it shows up for different people at first, and how able they are to notice it, and so, people, a lot of people come to meditate with me, particularly because of my background and the way that I present. I don't have a long white beard, and as I said, I'm not gonna dress all in white and talk to you in a sing-song voice, and so I think because of the people that I attract, they I can see them have really similar journeys as me, and also the people that I attract, and I should say are attracted to me, I'm not doing it, are drawn to me and feel some resonance with me. They often come to meditation for things like, I'm not sleeping well. I'm irritable and I'm snapping at my children. I want to be more productive and focused at work. I'm feeling depressed or anxious. I'm having some health issues. And meditation, what I teach, does address that stuff. Absolutely it does. And so they're happy, okay, great. I came, I got the result. But the way I actually think about what I do is, I don't know if you've ever had a dog, but when you have to give a dog, this is not to call my students dog, just bear with me with the analogy. When you have to give a dog a pill, a medication, you
I've
wrap
done that,
it
sure.
in peanut butter. Yep.
Oh,
So
I
you
do.
put
No,
it
I
in
mean, I
peanut
open
butter
their
with cheese or
jaws and put it in, and hold it down for 20
something.
seconds.
Well, for me, what I would do is, I would put the pill in like a big spoonful of peanut butter, and then I would, the dog would start licking the peanut butter and be so excited to eat the peanut butter that they didn't even notice that the pill went in. And I think that something really similar happens where people are drawn to meditation for some very kind of like practical, I don't want to say surface level, because it's not. Those things can be really transformative, when you're feeling better and you're less stressed and you're more loving to people. But it's almost like you don't know what you're really signing up for, in that there's so much more that comes. And that was my experience. I had no idea that I was looking for a spiritual awakening. You would never have heard me say that. I didn't know what I was really looking for. And then it just started happening. And now I look back and I say, of course, on some subconscious level, of course, that's what drew me to it, but I was like, I'm anxious, I'm depressed, I'm unhappy, I'm stressed, can't sleep very well because my mind won't turn off. And so I think a lot of people come to study with me in particular who have a similar story. I certainly have students of all kinds, but I would say that's the majority. And it's because they I think resonate with me. And when I first learned to meditate, I had to learn from a man in a suit in New York City who, had it's like type A, had a big job, a corporate job, and that was my conduit. And I wasn't resonating, with other certain types of teachers at that point. I certainly do now. That has shifted. But I think that's always what it comes down to. And I encourage people when they're thinking about who to study with and who to learn from, it is an important decision. It can make or break, your experience with meditation, and therefore so many other things in your life. And it really comes down to just listening to your intuition. I think we're drawn to the people who are going to be the best translators and vehicles of this for us. We all show up. So yes, there are a lot of teachers, but we're all very different in who we are, how we show up, how we teach, how this is channeled through us. And so the best advice I can always give is, if you meet someone who has what you want, if something about a teacher just resonates with you, like follow that, because that's when it really works out the best.
Jess, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I want you to take a listen to this, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Okay, great.
So I started learning those chants in India, and I would sing a lot there because I liked it. Then he sent me back to America after 2.5 years, and then he left the body. Then he died. before I could get back. And I was so crushed by that. I was so attached to him physically as being the only place, the only way I had ever been happy was when I was with him, in a certain kind of happiness, that I thought it was over for me now, you know. And he's gone, and that's it. I'll never be happy again. So I started to live in a very hopeless way. And a lot of things happened. I got involved with heavy drugs again. I was strung out on free days for about 1.5 years, 2 years at one point. And I didn't start singing to him again until 1994, which is 21 years after he died. Because I was standing in my room in New York, and I was really in bad shape, very unhappy, tremendous despair. And I walked into the living room, and I was struck like a lightning bolt with the understanding that if I did not sing with people, chant with people, I would never clean out the dark corners of my own heart. And of course, I intuitively understood that that was my only problem. That all my suffering was coming from this darkness and these shadows in my own heart. And that chanting was the only way that I had to do that. It was just a flash. And even then, it took me a few months to figure out how to start doing that. But that's why I sing. I don't sing to have bliss, to have joy. I sing to fucking live.
Jess Van Garsse, you want to take a guess at who that is?
It doesn't quite sound like him, but the content does. Is it Krishna Das?
Yes, that was my first interview with KD. Yeah, he's
Wow.
we've really he helped me get on. I mean, I was primarily interviewing, and I still interview musicians, old and young. But he is a musician, but he's also obviously somebody who, I just, I wanted you to talk about, your concept of love and how you bring love to the world, and ultimately, if you love yourself.
Can I speak to one other thing, because I'm sure it will tie in. That's how it always works,
Yeah, absolutely.
But I just was so struck by his story around, feeling like when his teacher dropped the body and died, depending on how you like to put words to that, he felt like it was gone. The effects were gone. He was done. That all of it was his teacher and not him. And I think that that's such an important part of meditation, spiritual practice, and spiritual journey, is to not make your teacher, let's put it a different way, to be self-sufficient, right? To have a practice that you can do in order to get there, right? I think there are a lot of people currently throughout history who are special to be around. They have an aura, and you'll see a lot of people want to be around them, just in their presence, and they feel something in their presence. But that person then leaves, and those effects are gone. And so not only do you not have a way to do it yourself, you're attaching all of those feelings to this one person. And I think, you're around those people, and if you don't have a tool, you're no better off in the long run. And on top of that, I think, this is my experience anyway, is then you sort of even feel bad about yourself. Like, why can't I be like them? They're so serene, or they're so enlightened, or whatever it may be that you love about them. And you're like, oh, why can't I get there? When they had practices, they had techniques, they had teachers, they had ways they had a self-sufficient practice. There are some who are the very lucky few who just, I suppose, are one day bestowed with some sort of enlightenment, that's great. I don't think that's how most humans are. We need tools, we need avenues. We're not going to just watch someone else be at that level of spiritual connection and then expect ourselves to be there too. So I think that's just one thing that I really was struck by, in his story, or the snippet of his story. And, with regards to your question around love, I touched on it a little bit. Something that's important to me, I think, important to this conversation around love, which is I came from this place of thinking I had to be tough on myself in order to experience change. And that's shifted, and at first I was resistant to it, thinking, okay, if I just let myself be and I just love myself as I am, and I don't try and push myself to change, like, that's not going to work, and it does the softness, the acceptance, the loving approach, right? I think that opens up, no change can happen with like shame, and I also think that there's a balance. There's a way to say I'm perfect as I am, and there's more freedom for me, and there's more to be experienced, and there's more happiness, and there's more, as opposed to I'm less, and holding those two things together has personally been for me the way of real growth. And I will say that even that ability to be that way was a result of meditating, and this particular practice and dedication to that for years. So we don't have to, again, try and get there so much as we start the journey, and we will find that those edges soften, and we are able to have that love of ourselves, like I love myself? Certainly not. And now, like, I think I'm pretty just like darling, like I don't do it right all the time.
Right.
But
no,
you
you're I mean, you are like, your aura is, but I know, can you just talk to people out there about, I guess it's a twofold question. I mean, it sounds to me that when you were younger, your love was conditioned on pushing yourself and doing exceptionally well at whatever you were doing, and that was when love was it was not unconditional, and that can, obviously, you very have a lot of skills, like in terms of, it seems to me like I'm very interested in talking about content creation, recognition of, really valuable content. Obviously, you're a great doc maker and things like that. But, how did you not allow resentment to come into your space? How have you learned to keep your heart open? Because you look, I mean, you are like an open vessel now to your students. It's very evident to me that you have surrendered. But can you talk to people that are growing up in a situation where love it can be a quid pro quo. There may not be any love shown to them. And like you said, you just got to keep thinking, well, if I keep pushing myself, or if I just keep doing this, I'll be okay. And then how did you learn to surrender?
First of all, to name, I think there are a lot of people who experience love as being conditional. And what then is the message is, you're not worthy to be alive unless you do X, X, and X. And what a sad thing to believe about yourself.
Is that something that, is that what you experienced?
Yeah, I wasn't conscious of that happening until I really looked back and understood. But yeah, absolutely. I felt as though I had to prove my worth of being alive. And that's where a lot of the drive, and the achievement came from. I always had to be better, 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 better. And, I think now I am always getting better. I'm still growing. And you know, I have surrendered, and believe me, I keep having to practice that every day,
Absolutely.
you
No, I mean,
know,
I'm just
you
trying to
know?
get to the idea of like,
Yeah.
I guess here's the other point is like when I started on the radio 10 years ago, I started doing this program, and I hadn't really found my voice, and I was like, but I
Mm-hmm.
was reaching out to musicians, and I realized it was a niche thing, and it started to grow, and then I was getting to this person, and I kept building and building, but I was still like, I was so uh, insecure in some ways that because my folks would be
Mm-hmm.
like, "What are you doing? You have to support your children. Your marriage is not
Mm-hmm.
going well. Like, what are you?" And I kept trying to tell them that how important I thought the work that I was doing was, and then over
Mm-hmm.
time, about 5 or 6 years in, I had exceeded what I set out to do, and a lot of that insecurity fell away. And now,
Mm-hmm.
after 4 publications and a lot of interesting things moving after 10 years, like I don't even have to uh, seek the recognition of the people that I love and love me. It's
Mm-hmm.
there. So I think what I wanted to say is like the surrender part is when you came to a realization that your parents or the people closest to you who raised you to say you're only worthy if you can do this,
Mm-hmm.
how you
Mm-hmm.
learned to surrender to saying I as bad as the dogma is and as hard as the judgment and the shame and the guilt, I am going to surrender to this path because I know it's the right path,
Mm-hmm.
regardless if the people that quote
Mm-hmm.
unquote love me, if I'm totally misunderstood. That's what I was really meaning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that was certainly my experience too. I can relate to a lot of that. The idea first came to me, and honestly, pretty soon after I learned this technique, I was like, how does everyone not know about this? Like I was incredulous.
Hmm.
And the idea first came to me, you need to teach. And I thought, don't be insane. I'm not going to become a meditation teacher. That's crazy.
Now, why? Now, where
And
where were you at that? Like
yeah,
you were traveling the world, or you were what?
yeah,
Why was it
I had
so?
a great,
Yeah.
I had a great job. And I also, at that point, I think I thought, even though meditation was working for me, again, I was coming at it from that very practical mind. I was like, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not going to be a spiritual
Right. You were
teacher,
in the logic mind. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
also, a lot of it, right, was that everyone would think it was crazy. And a lot of people did when I finally did it, but
Specifically,
it
when
just
you
kept
say everyone, you
being there.
mean you mean
Yeah.
people that were closest in your social circle and or parent, family, that kind of stuff.
Yes. And also, people in my business, I was doing really well,
Right.
and
Right.
people thought it was
I
crazy,
love this. I
that I
love
would
this.
take this
Yeah.
path.
Yes.
And my parents, for sure, and my husband at the time. Yeah, everyone close to me. And, you know, first I had to just surrender, right? I pushed this away, away, away. And then I was like, I give in. Like, this is the most right thing I've ever done. And I
Hmm.
stopped thinking about it, and it just happened. Like,
Hmm.
I feel like I snapped my finger. I didn't even snap my fingers. I blinked. And I was living in an ashram in India. Like, it just happened as soon as I surrendered. And I surrendered only because it just kept nudging me. And also because I was meditating. I had been meditating, and my ability to hear my intuition and peel away
Hmm.
what other people thought or what my conscious ego mind was telling me, I was much more connected to that intuition. And that's how I've been since. I have taken some big moves since where I'm just like, I'm going to do this. And I just go,
I'm
and
so,
people think
so
it's,
that is just the most. Can you just talk about to people about what that is? That kind of is it is it a feeling? Is it a multi-sensory like when you surrendered, when you started to get into that process of um, just allowing everything to fall away and then pursuing the
mm-hmm,
what you know is your true nature. Was it because you kept saying, I know this was right. I knew it was the right thing.
Yeah.
But how did you know? Was it
Yeah.
a feeling? What was that overarching vibe that was, I don't want to say so intoxicating, but that led you, and then poof, you were in the ashram?
I think it's funny because it was now I'm just so used to that feeling and listening to it that it's such a fun exercise to try and describe. But I think what struck me back then was actually a lack of thinking about it. I stopped thinking about it.
Yeah.
There were no pro and con lists. There was no analysis. There also was a complete freedom from what other people thought. It was like, well, like this is what has to happen. And so I was freed. I mean, I was certainly, I wanted support, and I was glad when I had it. And it was, it was a journey to really let go of what other people would have thought about it, but not really, not as much as it would have been, I also think that those intuitions often come in the form of like, let's see.
No, you know what I want? This is so important. It's so important.
Yeah.
This is so important because it's so powerful. Talk to cats about how, like, truthfully, how you specifically how you let go of judgment and shame and guilt. I received the Tao maybe 8 years ago. I'm a Taoist, and it was like my first spiritual transmission. I mean, my name is very Jewish, but my mom is Catholic. I was never bar mitzvah. I never had confirmation. My first real spiritual transmission was the Tao, and all the guilt, shame, and judgment that Judeo-Christian society foists upon us fell away. And some people would say, "Oh, you have no expectations. You don't have high. You don't have any drive," which is not true. It's just that I no longer look like that on anybody, and I don't look at myself like that at all. And you came from a place of the bar was set very high, and you kept pushing yourself more and more. So, like, the idea of what's your advice to people who are told, because that's what's hanging us up now. It's what's hanging up society now, is that, and it goes on both sides. I mean, I hate to tell people this. It's not a political thing. It's just there's a shaming and a guilt and a judgment that just pervades us, and it's staggering how it paralyzes people. And you said it could have been much worse, but it was okay because, and I just want to know what you think the tenets are for people who are really impeded by that.
First of all, meditate.
Yeah, no, I mean that, but that you got to calm. Yeah, I dig. I mean,
yeah. I mean, what I would say is I feel like, here's the thing. The first time, maybe the first few times you do it, it's going to be scary. Don't sit around and wait for this moment to be like, oh, I know completely in my intuition and I have no fear. And it is going to be scary the first time. It's like a trust fall. Sure. Right. And then what happens is that you're caught and it turns out incredibly well. And you say, oh, wait a second. When I listen to that feeling, that thing, this feels, I feel no anxiety, right? I feel no anxiety. I don't feel worry. And it turns out, like, in a way that you're like, of course that happened. Thank goodness I did that. And so eventually you start to accrue enough personal experience with that you're like, this is terrifying, but I know how this goes. I know how this goes. And to the contrary, I discovered and know how it goes when I don't listen to that. Things get bumpy, right? Because nature is trying to direct me, right? And if I'm not paying attention, I'm gonna get bumped in that direction. So the idea is you start to go in that direction before you kind of have to get kicked, in that direction. And so to me, it's about, I think the other piece of advice is just take the next step, right? So take one step towards it and then pay attention, right? And then take another step towards it and then pay attention. So you don't have to leap off the cliff immediately, because that can be really scary. And so you take one step. There's this beautiful story from the Veda of this prince, right? And he's in charge of this big kingdom, and he loves to hunt, and so he goes out in the woods and he's following this deer, and he's just so enamored and so intent on what he's doing that he loses track of all time and all of his responsibilities and everything else. And then suddenly he realizes, the forest gets very dark. It's nighttime. He can't see anything. He has no idea where he is, and he can't find his way back to the kingdom. And he's so terrified. There's these noises, these scary animal noises, and he's so scared he just takes a step. And as he takes a step, the path lights up in front of him. And then he's scared and he stops and the path disappears. And then he takes one more step and the stone in front of him lights up. And so like this, just the next stone in front of him is lit up. And so he follows that stone by stone by stone. And so it's kind of like, you're driving in the dark, pitch black in your car. You've got your headlights. They give you enough light to know just as much as you need to know about where you're going and stay safe. So we don't have to take some huge leap. We don't have to know what's going to happen. We're just going to take the next step, and then we're going to be given the information that we need through the outside world, through our intuition about the next step. And this way you can have more and more bravery, especially because as you go, you start to practice that and you start to have more faith and more confidence,
Well, no, that's,
yeah.
This, I was going to say, like, a lot of my closest friends, when I went on I've been in the wilderness for years, chopping my way out with a machete and, just sort of enjoying the forbidden fruit along the way. But a lot of my really close friends were like, oh, he's crazy. He's lost his mind. And they've come back. Some have come back but right now, the people that I think this is the bottom line. Having two daughters, I just realized that, like, and I talk about love a lot, but actually respect is more important or more important than love. And you can't really have authentic, unconditional love without respect. And I just want to know if your parents and the people that raised you, if they respect you.
This story will, I think, answer that question.
Okay,
so
go ahead.
My mom did not agree or understand my decision to become a teacher and go to India. I mean, up until, love her to death, up until maybe a month before I was leaving, she was still saying, if you go to India, and I was like, Mom, I'm going,
Right.
And I joke with her about this. At one point, she rolled her eyes so big that I thought she was going to fall off the chair. I mean, she just thought it was crazy and stupid and confusing and scary. I mean, a lot of it comes from, she just wanted me to be safe. And she didn't understand, right? Now, cut to a few years later where my mom learned to meditate with me.
Yeah.
And she meditates every day. She loves it.
It's unbelievable.
It's changing her. And she is, love this woman, the last person you'd expect to learn to meditate ever, right? So I think it took for me following my heart, and then not pushing it. I came back, I was teaching people. She never expressed interest in learning, and I never asked, right? She came to it in her own time. And it would never have clicked for her if I was trying to force it down her throat, So
Totally.
I think the moral of that story is you listen to you, and you don't worry so much about the other people, and you do your own spiritual practice, and people will join by observing you, not by being proselytized.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, she saw a change in you, and then she grew, she moved closer she wanted to get closer to that. What about your father?
He was, I think he probably similarly didn't understand it. My mom voiced it much more to me. He also learned to meditate with me.
Wow. And what an aura you have.
I mean, it was really, and I think it was that which is noticing a shift, noticing such a change, As I said, they actually were the ones that originated Jess 2.0, but I think my mom was just so it was just so obvious, even to the greatest skeptic. I was totally different.
I love it.
In really great ways. And, she'd just be like, who are you? Like, that's not how the Jess I know would have reacted to that. And I think that's what I tell, because when I have students, they're like, they come out of the class and they want to tell everyone. They want to like sing it from the rooftops, get everyone around them meditating. And I say, just do you. Just worry about you, and people are going to be drawn to that, and let them come to the practice that way. The best way to not set someone up for success is if they're coming because they're being forced to, with kids in particular. I teach kids, and I'm very discerning, and I talk to the parents to make sure this is like something that the kid is interested in doing and not something that the parent is demanding they do so that they behave better, because that's a recipe for setting that child up for a lifetime of being anti-meditation.
What was Jess 1.0 like?
Oh my God.
I mean, like when your mom, can you give an example of how your mom was?
Yeah.
Like there's no way how Jess 1.0 would have acted.
Oh, let me think.
And I'm just curious about, because I mean,
yeah,
I'm still like, I just appreciate the one word that we haven't used yet is cultivating. And you've cultivated your true nature in a very sincere way for. So you saying you've been on this trip for 5 years? When did it really start?
8 years. 8 years.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So what was Jess 1.0? Give an example of what you reacted like then, and then how Jess 2.0 would react now.
Well, I think there's the small examples,
which are actually the most
sure
the most relevant.
Many.
I don't.
Exactly.
It's like trying
That's
to
figure.
Yeah, I know they're absolutely.
That's
it's
what
like.
I say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Life is made up of, people want to come in and be like more mindful. And then it's like, okay, so they're not more mindful overnight, but like, wow, did they just enjoy the taste of that meal, or the, the softness of their child's skin? Anyway, I could talk for quite a bit about how these changes show up in little ways, but guess what? Life is made up of little moments, and big changes are made up of little moments. But, so this is a tiny example. It's just the first one that pops into mind.
Yeah.
Is, I was visiting them, and I wanted to go to yoga class, and I drove all the way across town. Probably took me 30 minutes. We drove together, I think. And I showed up, and I guess the time had changed. The schedule was out of date. I don't know. I showed up, and the studio was closed. And I just went, oh, all right, and turned around and went home. And that's not how I would have reacted to that, You would have
smashed.
I had a plan. I was busy.
Door.
I scheduled. Not quite that, but I would have been complaining about it.
Yeah,
and
right.
Sort of indignant,
I did.
Yeah,
totally.
And then then there ranges from that to really, really big opportunities to see the changes. My brother died last year. A few years before that, I went through a really difficult divorce, and so there's been some real challenges in my life, and in fact, those are the moments that I am just floored, and people around me too, by how differently I showed up to it. I think, Jess 1.0, there's so many things, but I had a real edge, I was tough. I was
I can tell.
With other people.
I can feel that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was really, I just was, I wanted what I wanted when I wanted it, and I didn't have a lot of, just spaciousness. I didn't have a lot of love for myself. And so I wasn't always so accepting and loving, and generous and compassionate with others. I was pretty selfish, and pretty self-centered around my own needs and my own life. I wasn't present so much, I was in my head a lot. I was very kind of cerebral, or in my own issues. I wouldn't have, now I'll go on a hike I'm not listening to anything or doing anything. I'm just, I'm experiencing the moment, and that's not something I would have done before. And I was irritable, I was kind of I was easily affected by things. They'd either upset me, or I'd get kind of irritable, and I was just very stressed, and when I finally found a way to just release a lot of that stress from my system, these things that I'd been trying to change about myself just kind of started happening from the inside out. And as I said, some things that I actively wanted to change, and then so many others that I didn't even know needed to shift or could shift.
Do you
Yeah, those
recommend? I
are
mean, this
some
is so
examples.
important. I mean, like as it relates to, I mean, I was married to the mother of my children for 13 years, and there was love, in the definitely for quite a while, but then you know spiritually, it wasn't just spirit, but it was like you just sort of recognize that you're on different paths, and then probably a lot of parents sometimes they stay together until the kids are in college for some reason. They feel like they're doing it for the kids, but that it's so much. It was not healthy for our children to see us not
Mm-hmm.
functioning well, and
Mm-hmm.
so we got divorced, and it wasn't really traumatic for me because I was no longer in love. I will always love her.
Mm-hmm.
She's
Mm-hmm.
always the mother of my children, but I was not in love with her. So, and I'm very grateful because there are cats who that doesn't work out that way, where they're
Mm-hmm.
blindsided or they're still deeply in love, whatever. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
can you talk about when you were already on your path and this was the dissolution of your marriage was something that you wanted to make a change with? Was it something that actively happened? Did it happen in the flow, or did you just recognize that you, in order to pursue your true nature, you needed more? You couldn't be in a relationship with somebody who didn't understand that.
I think I can talk big picture. I think just out of care for my ex-husband, I won't get
Absolutely,
into
yeah, that's fine.
details.
Yeah,
Yeah, but I think, the way that I see that is we were absolutely meant to be married to each other, and then we absolutely were meant to be divorced.
mm,
Like I was aware of that right away. I was I said thank you, actually. I have this tattoo on I got it right after my divorce. I have this tattoo on my wrist, which it says thank you in Sanskrit. And I have it there so I can remember. But I just had this sense of like, this is painful, but thank you. And to me, it is a practice to say whatever happens in life, thank you. And sometimes that's thank you. Oh my gosh, this is amazing. And sometimes it's like a belated thank you. We realize afterwards it was a
yeah,
gift.
totally.
And sometimes it's like a through gritted teeth, like, thank you. I can't imagine how this is going to be a gift. But I think it all is. And sometimes I just don't like the wrapping paper,
I did, yeah.
and yeah. And so I think that, but even then it was painful, and I was thankful. I feel as though um, the nature just took care of it and took care of both of us, for what we both needed, and in a way that was so it was so clear to me at that point. And
Let me
that,
just ask you
yeah, yeah,
if you had not gotten if you had not started marinating in your yogic practice, do you think you would have just not really been tapped into your intuition and would have continued? I just see so many people in
yeah,
relationships where it's already very obvious that I just see a lot of older people that are still married and they hate each other. And it's like, I
yeah,
mean, and it's just not, it's not, anyway, I just wonder
yeah.
if you had, I mean, it's all, sort of hindsight, but if you had been continuing on your Jess 1.0, would you have even had the intuition to recognize that it made sense, even though it was going to be
Uh,
painful?
yeah, I here's what I know, actually,
Yeah. What do you
is
know?
that
What do you know?
we would have stayed together for some period of time longer.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. Um, but I think it comes back, and then it would have ended in a worse way, in a worse
It would have
way.
been harder.
And
Yeah.
I think it
That's
gets
right.
back to, yeah,
Yeah.
it gets back to, I think nature is always guiding us where it needs us to go and where we're meant to go. And at first it's like it is given to us as sort of a like charm. Ooh, that's interesting. Like we're lured in that direction because
Mm,
something sounds good to us, right?
mm,
And then if we are not attuned enough, or we don't, or we refuse to listen to that, then we start getting maybe elbowed in that direction, right? And if we're still not paying attention, maybe we get a whole, sort of a full body push in that direction, right?
Yes.
And if we don't pay attention, we will be knocked over the head and dragged.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And so for me, I think it would have just gotten to the point where I was knocked over the head and dragged. And I think I am, because of my practices, I'm so much more able now to notice the first subtle hints of either charm or aversion, right? I think that's how nature speaks to us. It's like, ooh, something about that I don't like that, or, oh, that feels really charming. And honestly, I think it's because I did get knocked over the head a couple of times that I don't want that experience again. And so I will listen to it, because the fear maybe of that moment of taking the step is like, this is strange. This is not what I expected, is so overridden by the discomfort that I don't feel like going through again, of ignoring that, and yes, I think you have enough experiences like that, and you start to see that that's the way it works. And then it's pretty easy to listen, because the alternative is not so fun.
Well, I have another name that voice. You're not going to know who it is, but it's a little long. I can only preface it by saying that when I saw you, I believed that that this was the question this was what I felt that I wanted to talk to you about. So just take a listen to this, and then and we'll come back.
Okay, great.
I had been seeking for years, ever since when I first started playing bass in 1962, or at least a couple of years after that, and why I was playing music. What was the reason for it? Because it wasn't enough for me just to have fun and enjoy it. I wanted to. I wanted to know why I was playing, and what prefaced that was there a God that created us all? Was this, what was my life all about? So I started investigating and pursuing, reading different books and just talking to people, and to find out if there really was a God. And I became confused by man's opinions. I became confused by the vanity and by egos and just the intellectualism and the way we do to try to puff ourselves up and make ourselves important in life, that power. And so I just start praying. And it says, if there really is a God, reveal yourself to me and make yourself known. I can't deal with the intellectualism. Everything's becoming just too perfect and precise, and too much vanity and ego. And so if you're there, reveal yourself to me. So slowly but surely, the Lord started revealing and making things clear to me. And on this path, part of the process was finding out why I was playing music. What's the reason for this? I thought, well, if there is a God, then that God created music. If there is a God, then that God created me and put the desire in me to play music and gave me the love for music. So I thought, well, my first responsibility then would be to find out if there is a God. It made sense to me. It's like going to the very root, of it all. So that was my first.
You did it on your own, though. You were.
Yes, I did this on my own.
Yeah,
right.
It's very beautiful.
I didn't want to belong to a group and be under the religiosity and the traditions of the church, and it just gets bogged down with bureaucracy.
No, I really dig it. I dig it. I dig it so much.
I wasn't interested in that. Anyways, in answer to your question, I had to preface my answer to your question a little bit, just give you a little background. But
Sure.
there was a two issue of 2 issues of Cadence magazine from 2005. I think it was the May and the June issue that William Minor did like a 7-8 hour interview with me in New York. And there was so much information Cadence had to bring out a 2-part interview. And I talk a lot about this in that article in Cadence. There was a coffee house I had called Selah in Portland, Oregon, back in the 70s. And I had been living on a farm prior to that. I moved from Seattle to a farm in Woodland, Washington, and so I drove a tractor for a year, planted seeds to raise hay that we used to feed the cattle. It was a cattle ranch. It was my dad and his brother's ranch. So my wife and my son Scotty and Davy, we only had 2 kids at that time, lived on the farm for a year. And I was driving a tractor, and one day this plan for a puppet show. When I was a young kid in grade school, I had puppet shows for the kids, and I would do these little puppet shows. So I hadn't thought about this for years. I'm driving a tractor, and all of a sudden into my mind pops a plan to make a puppet house for puppet shows. And all the plans came into my mind. I went down to the lumber yard and bought all the things I thought I needed. I had written nothing down. Actually, when I finished making this puppet house, I had like a 6-inch piece of 2x4 left. So I actually got just the right amount of wood. It was a puppet house that you could stand up in. It had a folding roof. It was a collapsible, and it was painted purple and yellow and some other colors. It was really bright. It was for kids. And when I finished it, my wife says, "What are you going to do with this?" And I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "I guess put it in the barn. I have no use for it." At that time. So I put it in the barn. A couple of years later, I was hunting for a place to have a coffee house like the Longland in Seattle. And to make a long story short, I found a place. I was a lawyer in town that owned this building that was full of junk. He says, "If you can clear this out, you can." He says, "I'll just give it to you rent free, and you can go to my lumber yard and charge whatever you want, and fix it up, and you can just have it rent free. I'll let you use it." So I got a junker to come and take out all the junk, and as a reward, I gave him like 2 or 3 oak tables, antiques that were in the place, and he cleared everything out. And then I spent a year on my own tearing down a wall and putting up a ceiling. I worked in there for a year to get this place together. And when I had the stage finally built, I says, "Oh, I'll have puppet shows for the kids on Saturday afternoons." And when I brought the puppet house and put it on the stage, it fit perfectly. It was just 6 inches shy of hitting the top of the ceiling. It was just perfect.
Wow.
Perfect. So then I said, "Oh yeah, that's why I built that puppet house." And so I had this thing for the kids, and the shows behind the dialogue, I'd have Coltrane or Miles playing underneath the dialogue, so there was always jazz playing. And it was a coffee house that was free for people. They had a donation box, and people could come in, and I'd have my group in there playing on Friday nights started at like 1 in the morning till about 4 or 5. And it was isolated, so it didn't disturb the neighbors or anything. And, Jimmy Witherspoon and Charlie Hayden and Ralph Towner and different people, when they were in town, they'd come by the coffee house. So it became quite a great place to be for after hours. And when I finally went on the road with Joe Henderson, I had to give it up because I started traveling a lot, and I couldn't run it anymore. But in this coffee house, I would plan my puppet
shows for that following Friday, and I'd write the script down. Well, one day I was in the midst of writing the script, and all of a sudden I saw this vision. Now, it wasn't a vision where everything outside of me changed. It was a vision inside. But it was very real, and I saw this pool. It was a color pool, which is the name of my publishing company, and which was the name of my very first CD that came out on Muse Records. But Joe Fields at the time let Stardance kind of run interference, and then he brought out Color Pool. But Color Pool was the very first CD, not Stardance, the first recording. Anyways, I saw this beautiful pool filled with all these colors, and it's difficult to describe the colors because they were spiritual colors. They aren't like reds, yellows, blues like we see here on Earth. They were different colors. I can't really explain. And how do I know they were colors? Well, that's a good question, but that's the best word I can come up with to describe the radiance and the beauty of it. And I saw the Lord.
Wow, I didn't realize it cut off at that point. First of all,
on the edge of my seat.
I guess I did that for suspense. But so that was a bass player. Basically, I'm going to have to get the quote up here because it's profound. But basically, what God said to him was that these notes of the music that I was the one that cultivated, you're going to fill these notes with the color pool that he was seeing inside of his spiritual vision. And I'm not doing justice to. I'll send you the entire transcript because when I saw you, Jess, for the first time, it was that color pool. It wasn't when I saw you I could see inside, and that I could see that you were awash in a lot of different spiritual colors. And I wanted to ask you basically about, like you said, you kind of, it was like poof, you went right to the ashram, but I know that you had a vision or visions, and maybe they weren't like in the literal sense, but they might have been internal. But I was hoping you could talk about something that puts you into samadhi, something that puts you into the spirit mind, because that is, in my mind, that is when you are at your greatest strength, is when you are in your spirit mind.
Yeah. I think that it wasn't so much a proof I was in India. It was more that I don't remember thinking about it. There wasn't this long drawn out decision process. Like my body just went there. And I remember, I went knowing so little. Like people would ask me questions, how many people are going to be in your training? What kind of place are you staying? And
it's all totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant. But yeah, go ahead.
I had no idea.
Right.
I had no idea. Right. I couldn't answer any of the basic, where exactly are you going to be staying? I couldn't even answer basic questions.
And it didn't matter. Yeah, totally.
That just shows, it just shows I got on a plane to go to India, which is not how I used to handle a lot of other things in life. Right. And so my complete lack of needing to know all the details, there was just this faith. I felt as though I was kind of being propelled and not thinking about it. And I think that since, certainly I get a lot of insights and epiphanies and visions of things inside my meditation.
Can you share one?
It's everything from, I still, in addition to teaching meditation, I am an expert in video content.
No, I cannot wait that is going to be, that we're going to have to do set 2 on that. I want to know, I want to know your street cred on that. Cause so anyway, you still want to, I also want to be clear that there was, the thing about our society is that there was no material reason for you to go to India. This was a soul mission, right? I mean, there was no premeditation. You were being driven by something, maybe by the God within you. Continue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't know that at the time.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to ask you about that time, because you really didn't have the experience at that time.
I didn't. So I was not having these powerful like voices guiding me or visions. It was more of just I was just being propelled.
Absolutely.
And as I said, I did notice that it wasn't an intellectual exercise, and I was very calm about it. And I think that's, you asked earlier, what can people do to hone that ability to listen to one's intuition? And it's like, I know that if I'm having thoughts of like, I got to do this, like there's urgency around it. Like, that's not the way that nature, consciousness, source, God, whatever name you want to put to it, talks to me, right? So when it's slow and not urgent and just like okay, then that is much more likely that is my intuition, right? So also when it comes from a place of not just fast urgency, but like huge stakes, like, your life is going to be over if you don't do this or do that. That's also not how it feels, intuition. And so, and it's a lack of thinking about it and more a feeling of it. And so, I loved in this excerpt, he was saying, he tells his long story, and then all these years later, he knows why he built that.
Can I read it to you? I just want to read you I want to read you the rest of it, because I know you, and I thank you for sitting through it. He said, they weren't reds, yellows, and blues like we see here on earth. He said, I saw the Lord dip in a ladle and let these colors flow out. I asked the Lord, what is this? He answered, this is a color pool that I've given to you to fill the note. He went on to tell me to fill the musical note with substance. Quote, the substance is my love, and I want you to go forth and show the glory of the kingdom of God, not for your glory and not from your power, but for my glory and my power. And that took all the glory away from me. I couldn't say, okay, this is me, I'm doing it, I'm great. I had to give that part of it up. I couldn't follow that path, and that was my purpose. I found my purpose playing music. Once I found my purpose, I was able to move forward in a confident way because my faith in the Lord had become strong. It really was as if I was walking on water. And, there are terms in there like Lord and things like that, but I just see everybody has God within them, but you have to cultivate it. And I just feel like with you, that's been ultimately your compass, and it's growing, it's continually growing, but you have really tapped into that, as opposed to what most people do, which is fight against the intuition, instinct, and the God within them, and go on this path of, living life by the rules that society says you should live by. You seem to be getting very adept at living life by your own rules and still being able to, as they say in music, sing for your supper. You're able to get by. You're able to provide. You're able to be prolific. And you're not freaking out. You're keeping both feet on the ground. Yeah. That's all through devotion and cultivation. So, I mean, there's a lot of color pool within you, and that is, and I just wonder if you can talk as you've sharpened, as you've continued to cultivate, sharpened your intuition. What's an example of a vision you've had in recent memory that was prophetic in some ways?
I think, first of all, I'm laughing because you say, I'm not freaking out. I'm not, but I met someone new the other day, and I think I mentioned, what an anxious person I used to be. And he looked at me so quizzically, like, you don't strike me at all as anxious, right? And sometimes there are those memories of just,
it's always still, it's there.
Be reminded of that.
Yeah,
you know what
totally,
I mean?
Yeah, totally.
But I will say, I guess what I mean by that is how much I've shifted, and how much I've changed. I had that wasn't even something that someone would perceive about me now, and I don't experience now. But what I would say to your question is, first there's this. the benefits of a meditation practice show up so differently in people. And I often see when I'm teaching a group that there's this sort of like meditation envy happening, right? Because there are people who will have these visions. I mean, first day, they'll have these really interesting or powerful visions. It's visual for them, right? And then I see everybody else be like, oh, I was just thinking about what I was having for lunch, like I'm envious. I must be doing it wrong. And I didn't have like visions. So I was one of those people who was like, oh, wow, like, that sounds cool, and for me, it was, first I had to meditate for a while, right, before I started to experience those. For me, it feels more like a download. It's like I'm suddenly, like something dropped into me and I'm like, oh, like it's a total, it comes in the form of insight. And so it's suddenly I know something that I didn't before.
Well, give an example. Can you give an example?
Yeah.
Can you give an example?
Yeah. I mean, everything from, I was starting to say earlier, I mean, everything from something as simple as, I have suddenly this super creative idea for one of my video projects.
Oh boy.
Doing, right?
Oh
like,
boy.
Oh man, like that is a beautiful way to bring that to life. Or it's like a problem, like not quite sure how to solve this thing in my life. And then it's like, oh, what I mean? So I have a ton of creative ideas, and I teach a lot of people from creative fields because that's the field I come from. And they mirror that, they have some of their most creative ideas inside their meditation, but they're not sitting there thinking about it and noodling it. It just drops, and
right. So it's an
like
unconscious,
the missed parts.
Yeah, because like on a download, you would normally need to be conscious enough to click the download, but you're saying this is an unconscious, or this is a subliminal subliminal download. Something. Suddenly
you're just like, oh, like some clouds part, and you're just, something is super clear for me all of a sudden. And I think that, it's funny because the best way to not get those is to sit down hoping for it, right?
Oh, that's right.
So, people will say, I'm going to meditate on X. And I say, please don't do that.
Because it'll never happen.
If you want some clarity, don't meditate on that thing. Let it go, forget it, and the clarity will come. And one of the things I always teach too is, it's so tempting sometimes to, you have this amazing idea in meditation, and then you want to like not lose it. And so you hang on to it, and maybe you even crack an eye open and jot it down. And I really teach not to do that, because it's like a washing machine, like a top-loading washing machine. Like what happens when you open it to look at it? Like the process stops. And, a lot of times those ideas, like they're going to get even better if you leave it alone, like let it germinate. And I promise them all that, and anyone who's listening, that if you have a full epiphany, if you are getting a download, you're going to remember it. You're not going to forget that. And because it just like dropped into your body and your knowingness. And so you might remember it very clearly right when you come out of your meditation, or you might remember it 2 hours later while you're, walking down the street. But it'll stay with you. And, we're mining for diamonds with those kinds of insights, and we don't want to sort of get distracted by like a little shiny something. It's like let it marinate, let it germinate, and it will become very clear when it's done and when it's time to act on it.
Wow. I just, you've driven this conversation so well. Your energy is incredibly positive. I've also learned through my own experiences to, I guess people consider me a light healer, a light being in some ways, bringing light to people, even in the midst of, could be doing interviews with musicians who are in hospice, ready for, end of life. It could be with my children. It could be with anybody, but I tend to bring a lot of inspiration through a variety of mediums. And but I do want you to talk about, because I do believe he's looking down, he's with us now, and how not how you've dealt with the loss of your brother, but how you try to lead your life to honor him today.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. I think his death was, of course, very, very difficult. It followed a long period of difficulty, and certainly the most challenging thing that I've gone through. And it was the most spiritual experience of my life. And I think that comes from a lot of things. One is, when someone that you love is slipping away, you have never been more present. There is no yesterday, there is no tomorrow. There's not even 5 minutes ago or 5 minutes from now. You are there. And, however you talk about or define what is greater than us, right? Pure consciousness, the oneness, source, nature, God, doesn't matter what name we give to it. That and connection with it exists only in the present moment. Never, ever, ever have we found what we're looking for by thinking about it, right? It's when we're here, right? And so to be so in the present moment was incredibly powerful. And I do think that, again, we all have our beliefs about what happens when we die, and they're just beliefs because we won't know until we die. But that when someone has one foot out and one foot in, there's an opening, right? There's everybody around that feels an opening between those two places and states. And so that, I think, was another big piece of it. And the last piece is that it was so incredibly difficult that I knew that I couldn't do this alone. Like, Jess could not do this alone. And so I feel as though I really, I knew that I needed, the higher power, the higher self, something beyond myself in order to show up and make my way through it and stay well myself. And so I was so open and asking for and in conversation, with the help I needed, and praying, a lot for that help and inviting that in. And so I think those are incredible lessons, that I have kept with me, which is, and I knew all of them, but it was so powerful. It's to be fully present, and to be open to there being something greater than us, and recognizing that we are not our small sense of self. We are not only that there is something more, and that it has capacity that we do not, and
does he visit you?
It's changed over time, and that is something I surrender to, how I feel him and how he appears has changed, and I'm sure it will continue to. And I think it is a thing that I so enjoy, where we talk so much, especially in my circles, about these ideas of what it is that is beyond us, and what it feels like to be tapped into that, and what the nature of all of this is, right? And in this kind of example, what does it feel like? How does it appear when someone who's passed is with you? And it's it tickles me, because we use our little human vocabulary and our little human brains and our egos and our small sense of self to try and understand and describe these things that are by nature so much bigger than that. I think the idea that if you can define it, that's not it.
Right. No, I love it. No, I love
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's sometimes there are certain specific ways, but a lot of it is a bit more ephemeral. And I think that a lot of times it shows up in my intuition, frankly, being guided towards certain things, and frankly being incredibly grateful. It's such a cliche, but to have someone, especially a sibling, who shares the same genes and all of that, to be able to be well and to be alive. I don't think I used to, in the things I would feel grateful for, I didn't used to list being alive today. And now I do.
Yeah, totally.
There
are tomorrow is never guaranteed. I mean,
a couple of hours from now isn't.
did you have, because I know he loves you and he is looking, he wants to protect you. And yet, did you have some kind of, I've lost a couple, I haven't had knock on wood, I haven't had a lot of close family members pass away, but my best friend in Tucson, who's, healthier than me tenfold, died of COVID right at the beginning, and he was an avatar. And then I just tragically lost a spirit uncle to a tragic car accident in Washington State. And, it's just closure for as we transcend the cycle of birth and death and move on to the next life. I don't know if you feel that closure is essential or necessary to so that we don't come back in the next form working on the same things that we were working on in this lifetime. But are you at peace with the closure you had with him? Were you able to communicate with him before he passed?
I was, and yeah, I mean, that was such a gift that's a gift of a slow, protracted passing, is that there really was that time. And, we had such incredible conversations towards the end around, like, he became very interested in what happens after we die,
Yes.
And so he asked me a lot of questions about, I shared with him, a lot of what I believe and my perspective and spiritual teachings. And, I know that brought him a lot of peace. And I mean, we had some of the most amazing conversations we'd had, if not the most amazing conversations we'd had in our lives in those last times together. And I think, closure.
It's a funny word. Really, I mean, it's not necessarily the right word.
Is.
Yeah.
No, but it's a good like jumping off point for the conversation, because I saw this thing posted on social media, and it said, people think grief gets smaller over time, and they had like an image of a jar over time, and the black ball of grief getting smaller. And they said, but actually, we just grow around the grief.
Mm-hmm.
And then it showed this image of, the grief ball staying the same, but the jar gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think, it's certainly morphs and it's less concretely painful, but then it's something else, and I think anyone who's lost someone close, knows what a transformative experience it could be and how you aren't the same and you do grow around that. Everything difficult in my life has been an incredible, like, catapulted me into a new level of growth.
I love
and again, it's that present, like it was a gift, in so many ways. And if you can see it that way, and so I don't actually want closure. I want to continue to learn from this and grow from it, forever, I hope, and I think that there's this, it gets back to sort of this like spiritual bypassing sometimes of, we want to just get over it, or we should be over it. And that's just not the nature of these things. And so we accept that and we welcome it in. And that's when we get to reap the benefits of it and the fruits of it. And so I think it will continue to.
Yeah,
shape
no,
me
you're
forever.
so far down the road. Ain't no point in looking behind you now. I mean, it's you're gone, and you're in the extraterrestrial realm, and your frequencies are incredibly high. And I just, do you think we could do set 2 maybe next week?
Sure. Yeah.
Good, because I mean, it's clearly we're some of our some of the things that you do is in terms of content creation or viability of that. I mean, I cannot wait to go down that rabbit hole. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of
Happy to continue the conversation.
absolutely. I wanted to let you know that it's we're all clearly still on a path. You said something very profound just now about sort of just embracing everything, even the hardest things, the adversity. Um, you grow around it, but at the same time, you're so in the present in that moment. That's when you grow the most. And you have your purpose here, Jess, is in this lifetime is it's significant, and there are many more chapters for you to write outside of just your yoga craft and your movie making and just being, your presence. You have a lot of life left to live, and you are a very important person in this lifetime. So, even in those times of psychic panic that we all have, you just know that you are on the righteous path, and I know you know that. But I just appreciate you going there with
Thank
me today. It
you.
was such an honor to connect with
Thank
you.
you.
All right.
Thanks for the questions and the conversation that, was drawn out. So it was a real pleasure.
I'm glad. That's all I care about. People have a good time. That's all I care about. So yeah, we'll put together set two, and we'll do it again. Jess Van Garsse.
Great.
All right.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my friend. Have a beautiful day. Yep.
Okay.
Later.
Bye.
Bye. Another one of the books, Jess Van Garsse, On Her Path, and she laid it out today. What an honor. That's it for the Jake Feinberg Show.